I kept the stacks for 31 years, and for 30 of them the Veland thought I was a kind of janitor. That suited me. A janitor is a man you don't watch. I had a long room riveted into the underside of Coldgate, down where the station's spin is honest and your knees know it, and in that room I kept paper, logbooks, charts, ledgers bound in cloth and ledgers bound in tape, the treaty copies, the birth records, the manifests going back to the first human hull that ever bolted itself to this junction and asked permission to stay. 40,000 documents at the end, give or take, and I knew where every one of them lived the way you know where your own teeth are. The Veland ran Coldgate. They had built it 300 years before any of us arrived, and they ran it the way they ran everything, which was out of their heads. I should explain about their heads, because the whole of it turns on that. A Veland does not forget. I don't mean they have good memories. I mean the word forget is to them a kind of obscenity, a kidney failure of the soul. Every Veland is born wired into a thing they call the conquered, which is the shared standing memory of their entire people, held in a living lattice that runs through the walls of their stations and the marrow of their bones, and as near as anyone ever worked out the empty space between. When a Veland learns something, the conquered holds it. When a Veland dies, what they knew stays. They can stand in a corridor and recall, perfectly, the temperature of that corridor on a morning 400 years before they were spawned, because some clerk who is now long dead once noticed it, and the conquered noticed the clerk. They are, by any measure you'd care to use, the finest memory in the known galaxy. They will tell you so. They told me so many times, usually while looking at my paper. The first rememberer I ever dealt with was a tall one named Oru, of the high held, which is a rank, and a proud one. The Veland are built long and narrow, like a man drawn by someone who'd only had a man described to him, with a smooth gray head and 4 flat eyes that don't blink so much as consider. Oru came down to the stacks in my second year to inspect the human archive, because Coldgate's charter said somebody official had to, and nobody more senior wanted to come down to the honest gravity decks and look at our museum. He stood in the doorway and considered my shelves for a long time. "You write it down," he said, "not a question. The Veland rarely ask questions. Asking is close kin to forgetting." "We do," I said. "On sheets." "Paper mostly, some on slate down at the far end, the old stuff." He came in. He moved along the nearest run of shelving, 4 eyes drifting, and he reached out one long finger and did not quite touch a ledger spine, the way you don't quite touch a thing in a sick room. "Explain to me," he said, "the purpose." So I explained the purpose. I told him a human can't hold 40,000 documents in his head, which was true, and that we write things down so we don't lose them, which was also true, and that we'd been doing it a very long time and had gotten attached. He listened with the great gray patience the Veland have, which is the patience of a thing that has never once been in a hurry because it has never once been afraid of running out of anything. When I finished, he said, kindly, and I want to be fair, it was kindly, "It is a beautiful thing. A crutch can be beautiful. We had a kind of writing once before the conquered. We keep no examples. There was no reason to." He meant it as comfort. He was telling the lame man that his crutch was finally made. I said thank you, because I was younger then and it was easier than the alternative, and Oru of the high held went back up to the good decks, and for the next 8 years the Veland regarded the stacks as a sort of touching folk practice, like keeping bees. I'll tell you how they'd say it, because the saying of it is the whole shape of the thing. A Veland clerk would come down to file a copy of some birthing dispute. They didn't need the copy, the conquered had it, but the human and trade world ships that used Coldgate wanted a paper record they could carry away, and so the Veland humored us by stamping things. The clerk would hand me the sheet and watch me write the entry into the day log, and watch the way you watch a clever animal do a trick, and then, more often than not, the clerk would say some version of, "Does it not frighten you?" "Does what not frighten me?" "That it lives outside you, that you must go and find it. a small movement of the long head toward my shelves. We carry ours. It is always with us. Yours sits in the dark and waits and could burn. The Veland found this genuinely sad on our behalf. If this room burned human, what would you be? Cold, I said the first time. After that I had better lines, but they were all the same line underneath, which was, we'd write it down again from the copies. And they never heard the word copies. It went past them every time. To a people who have one perfect memory and only one, the idea that you would make a thing twice on purpose is not thrift. It is superstition. It is a man knocking on wood. Because that was the part they couldn't see, standing in my doorway being kind. They saw one room full of paper and they thought, how fragile, one fire and it's gone. What they did not see, because it never occurred to them to count, was that the birth records existed in 4 places. The day log here, the bound quarterly up in the registry office, the Trade World Guild's own duplicate 2 decks over. And, for the things that truly mattered, a 4th copy I will get to, because the 4th copy is where this story finally turns. The Veland had one memory, vast and perfect and shared by millions, and they thought that made them safe. We had 1,000 memories, small and flawed and scattered and recopied by bored clerks on slow shifts, and they thought that made us frightened. Only one of those 2 arrangements has a single point of failure. It took the souring to make them see which. It started, as the worst things do, as a small inconvenience that the proud chose to ignore. A Veland on the night registry, they ran a skeleton presence on the deep shifts, since the conquered meant any one of them was, in effect, all of them, misremembered a docking slot. This is not a thing that happens. A Veland misremembering is like water deciding to run uphill on a Tuesday. The slot was given twice. 2 hulls came for the same berth. There was a scrape, no one hurt, and the Veland supervisor logged it in the Concord, of course, not on paper, as operator error, and thought no more of it. 3 days later, a rememberer of the second held could not recall the name of a Station 2 jumps corps ward that every Veland child knew. He recalled it an hour later. He told no one. To admit a gap is, for them, a thing close to admitting you are dying. That is the part I want you to sit with, because it is the human thing and the alien thing both at once. The Veland could not raise the alarm early, when it would have cost them nothing, because the alarm was shame. Their whole dignity was built on never forgetting, and so the first symptom of forgetting was something each of them hid, alone, in the one place they had always trusted, which was the very thing now going wrong. By the time it could no longer be hidden, it was in the deep memory, the standing memory, the part that held the things no living Veland had bothered to relearn in 200 years, because why would you? The conquered held them, the conquered always held them. They called it the souring, a fault, a contagion, a fatting in the lattice. To this day I don't know that anyone fully understood it, and I'm a paper man, it's not my country. What I know is the shape it made on our deck, and the shape it made was this. The Veland began, for the first time in their recorded existence, to lose things, and they lost them from the bottom up, the oldest and deepest and least rehearsed first, and one of the oldest and deepest and least rehearsed things in the whole of the Concord was the master cycle protocol for Coldgate's own locks. I had better explain the locks too, I'm sorry. There's a lot to a station. Coldgate is a registry junction, which means hulls of 40 kinds come and go through it without ever sharing an atmosphere. And the thing that lets them do that safely is the cycle protocol, the exact ordered sequence by which the great lock stages pressurize and depressurize and key against one another, so that a methane breather and an oxygen breather and a thing that lives in warm brine can all dock to the same spine in the same hour, and none of them dies of the other one's air. The protocol is not simple. It is 300 years of accreted, hull-specific, hard-won sequence, and it has to be exact, and it had been held every step, every interlock, every exception for every strange visiting biology in the Concord. The Veland who ran the locks didn't read a procedure. They were the procedure. They knew it the way you know how to swallow. And then, one by one, down on the lock decks, the Veland lock masters began to find that when they reached for the next step, it was not there. Not forgotten the way you forget a name and it comes back. Gone. A hole with smooth edges where 300 years had been. They stalled the locks. They had to. You cannot guess at the sequence that keeps brine and methane apart. A guess is a funeral. So the lock masters stopped, and within a shift Coldgate could not safely cycle a single foreign hull, and within 2 shifts the approach lanes began to fill with ships that could not dock and could not be told a safe time to try, stacking up in the dark outside the station like a held breath. I watched it happen from below, the way you watch weather. The day log told me half of it before anyone official said a word, fewer birth stamps. Then none. Then a trade world captain coming down to the stacks personally, furious, demanding to know in writing why his methane hauler had been holding in the lane for 9 hours with no slot and no answer. I wrote his complaint into the log because that is what the log is for, and I told him I didn't know, which was true, and I went back up the stair on my honest gravity knees to find out. I found the registry office in a state I had never seen and would not have believed. The Veland do not panic. Panic is a thing that happens to you when you don't know what comes next, and a Veland always knows what comes next. It's the foundation under their feet. I came up the stair and the foundation was gone. Long gray figures stood very still in the way that I had learned over 30 years, meant the opposite of calm, meant a thing inside them was clawing at a wall that had always before been a door. Oru was there, older now, of course, as I was, of the high held still. He was standing at the great status board where the lane stack scrolled, hull after hull after hull holding in the dark, and he was not looking at it, because looking at it did not help, because the thing he needed was not on the board and was not any longer in his head. I had known him 8 years and then 30. In the formal, distant way you know the man who comes once a year to be kind about your crutch. I went and stood next to him at the board. "How bad?" I said. "We cannot cycle the eastern spine," he said. His voice was level. It cost him everything to keep it level. "We cannot recall the keying for brine-class hulls. There are 4 in the lane. We cannot," and here a Veland of the high held, 300 years of perfect memory in his blood, stopped, because the next word was a word his whole life had been built to never say. "We cannot remember." I want to be careful here, because this is the part where, in a worse telling, the human gets to be magnificent. I wasn't magnificent. I was a 60-year-old archivist with bad knees who happened to keep paper, and the thing I felt standing next to Oru at that board was not triumph. It was the specific, quiet vertigo of watching something enormous learn it could fall. So I didn't say anything clever. I said, "It's downstairs." He didn't understand me. Of course he didn't. I might as well have told him it was in the color blue. "The brine keying," I said. "The whole cycle protocol. The master sequence, all 300 years of it, every interlock, every biology exception. It's in the stacks. It's been in the stacks the whole time." 4 flat eyes considered me. "We never gave it to you to keep." "You didn't have to. The locks are station infrastructure. Every change to a safety protocol on this junction gets filed as a station record because the charter you wrote says so. Every time your lock masters revise the sequence, every new hull class, every exception, 300 years of revisions, a clerk filed the change. With us. In writing. Because you made us a registry, and a registry writes things down." "We filed copies," Oru said slowly, "as a courtesy to the trade worlds, paper they could carry. We did not," and I watched it arrive in him, the thing, the copies, the word that had gone past every Veland in that doorway for 30 years. "We did not keep them ourselves. We had no reason. The conquered held the true record. The paper was a shadow of it, for others." "The shadow's still here," I said. "The thing that cast it isn't. That happens to be how shadows are useful." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said the thing that I have kept all these years, the way I keep everything, written down in the day log, dated in my own hand, because that is the only kind of keeping I trust. Take me to it. The trouble when we got down to the stacks was that the Veland could not read. I don't say it to be cruel. Why would they read? Reading is a tool for getting words out of the dark and into a head, and the Veland had never in 300 years had a word in the dark. Their words lived inside them. They had no eyes for the page in the way that mattered. The 4 flat eyes could see the marks fine, could resolve every stroke of every letter, and the marks meant nothing, the way a song means nothing to a man who has only ever read the sheet. So I pulled the protocol. It lived in 3 places in my room, the bound master, the working duplicate, and the loose revision file, and I laid all 3 out on the long table under the honest lights, 300 years of lock sequence in a clerk's patient hand, and Oru of the High held bent his long gray body over it and could not read a word of it, and for the first time since I had known him, he was not kind about my paper. He was desperate for it. It is a different thing to want a crutch. I read it to him. That's the whole of the magnificent part, if you want it. An old man read aloud to an alien for 9 hours. I read him the brine class keying, and he held it in the Concord as I read. The souring had not taken the holding, only the held. The lattice could still catch a new thing even as it dropped the old ones, and I read him the methane interlocks and he caught those too. And somewhere around the 4th hour his lock masters came down to the stacks and stood in the doorway where Oru had once stood being kind. And they listened to a human read, their own 300-year-old work back to them off paper. And they learned it again with the page open in front of them, the marks no longer meaning nothing. I taught a Veland to read that night. By accident, around the edges of the protocol, Oru asked, near the end, how I knew which mark was which, and I showed him the way you'd show a child, this stroke is this sound. And a being with a perfect memory learns a thing exactly once. So by the time the eastern spine cycled its first brine hull at the back of the next shift, Oru could follow the lines himself, slowly, his long finger under each word, the most perfect memory in the galaxy moving its lips like a boy at a primer. The lanes cleared over 3 days. No one died. A methane hauler captain came back down to withdraw his complaint, which I also wrote in the log, because the log doesn't care which way the news runs. I have thought a great deal since about why it was the deepest things that went first. I think it's this. The Veland never lost what they used. The recent memory, the everyday memory, the names of the living and the slots of the day, that was rehearsed, refreshed, alive, and the souring couldn't get a grip on it. What it took was the still water. The old protocol no one had thought about in 200 years because no one needed to think about it, because it was perfect and it was held. The very perfection was the danger. A thing you never have to check is a thing you never notice is gone. And we flawed, frightened, paper-hoarding people, we are saved by exactly our weakness. We forget, so we write. We don't trust ourselves, so we copy. We are so unsure of our own minds that we keep 4 records of the same dull fact in 4 different rooms, and then teach our children a work song so there's a 5th. I haven't told you about the 5th copy. I said I would. The lock masters of Coldgate, the human ones who worked the night decks in the early years before the Veland trusted us with much, used to sing the brine keying. Made a tune of it, a long, ugly counting song with the interlock numbers built into the meter, the way sailors did, the way every working people in the history of working people has done with the thing they cannot afford to get wrong. It was a joke, mostly. It was also a record. When Oru came up out of the stacks that first night with the protocol re-held and the eastern spine cycling, I mentioned the song to him, in passing, half laughing. He stopped on the stair. He said, "There is a 5th." "There's a 5th," I said. "There's probably a 6th I don't know about. That's the whole point of us. We're not very good at remembering, so we got very good at not relying on anyone who is." He was quiet the rest of the way up. The Veland keep paper now. Not much. They're proud, and proud things change slowly, and I'd be lying if I said the whole cast swung overnight from contempt to devotion. But there is, in the registry office of Coldgate, a small bound book that did not exist before the souring, in which a Veland clerk writes, every shift by hand, slowly, finger under the line. The things the conquered holds that the station cannot afford to have held in only one place. The cycle protocol is the first entry. They asked me to teach the first 3 clerks their letters. I did. I charged them nothing and logged that too. Oru came down to the stacks one last time before I gave the room over to the woman who keeps it now. He was very old. So was I. He stood in the doorway where he had stood 40 years before and called my crutch beautiful, and he considered the shelves the way he always had, and then he said a thing I have thought about every day since. We believed, he said, that to forget was the only death. We built everything so that we would never forget, and it was the forgetting we could not survive when it came because we had never once practiced it. 4 flat eyes considering me. You practice it every hour of your lives. You forget, and you have made a whole art of forgetting well. We had no art. We had only the never. The never broke. I didn't say anything clever. I'd learned by then that the dignity of the moment belonged to him and not to me, and that a man who keeps records for a living ought to know better than anyone when to simply let the record stand. He asked me on his way out how a human bears it, the knowing that everything you hold will slip, that the room will burn, that the copies will yellow and the singers will die, and the song will go wrong in the 3rd verse the way songs do. I told him the truth, which is that we don't bear it. We write it down. And then, because we don't trust the writing either, we write it down again. There is a standing order at Coldgate now, entered in the registry the year I retired, in my own hand because Oru asked it be in my hand. It says that the station shall at all times keep 1 human archivist on the honest gravity deck, with paper, in case the conquered ever sours again. The most perfect memory in the galaxy keeps a paper copy now, and keeps a forgetful old people around to read it. I logged that too.